Hello guys, welcome to my humble YouTube channel where I bring you fanfiction that will brighten your days. Before we start, a subscribe is greatly appreciated, and don't forget to leave a like and ring the bell icon so you won't miss exciting new fanfiction stories. True God in Another Worlds, Tensura x Tbate, by Tempest_King_20. Chapter 33. Adventurers Guild. Rimuru Pav. Exiting the grandiose academy building, I couldn't help but appreciate the picturesque scenery that greeted me. The crisp, cool air intermingled with the sweet aroma of newly fallen autumn leaves makes my walk towards the adventurers' hall even more pleasant. The sounds of chirping birds and crunching leaves under my boots added to the harmonious symphony of nature, providing the perfect backdrop for my racing thoughts. Even though we were in the midst of preparing for a battle that could mean life or death for us all, I couldn't help but take in the beauty around me. The sky above was a dazzling shade of blue, the color stretching out as far as my eyes could see. The sun was shining brightly, casting a warm glow that enveloped everything in its path, making the more rational side of my mind aware of the contrast between the beauty of the day and the gravity of our situation. As I strolled towards my destination, I felt the occasional gust of wind tugging at my hair, reminding me of the fickle nature of life. With every step, I savored the tranquility of the scenery, knowing that this was a brief moment of respite before we delved back into the fray. Once I was a safe distance away from the academy, I dispelled the illusion charm that had allowed me to blend in. Suddenly, I felt Sylvia's presence in my mind. Less than did it go well? Greater than. Her voice interrupted my thoughts. The prospect of Cynthia's cooperation has been on my mind ever since Sylvia and I had begun formulating plans to take down Alacria. With a grin, I replied, greater than more than fine. I now have Cynthia's full cooperation, less than. My conversation with Cynthia had been a pleasant surprise. She had offered me a deal that was extremely favorable, and she was willing to help make me feel more confident in our efforts against Alacria. However, despite this momentous development, we were still lacking crucial information on the opposing army. This presents a serious problem when planning a battle, as we needed to find a way to gather intelligence and stay ahead of the game. With Cynthia by my side, however, I was certain we could come up with strategies that would give us an edge in battle. My thoughts drifted to the importance of information in warfare. No amount of information could help us overcome an adult Asura. I had heard that from Sylvia herself, but every scrap of knowledge could help us defeat their weaker soldiers. Sylvia and I, along with perhaps Arthur, could focus our efforts on taking down retainers and sides, while our allies cooperate with the rest. Less than Rimuru? Greater than. I was snapped back to reality by Sylvia's voice. Greater than. Oh, sorry, what were you saying? Less than. I shook my head, realizing I had been lost in thought. Less than. Jackson and I with the rest are waiting for you at the guild. Greater than. She repeated. Greater than. Why? Less than. I was bored, so I thought I'd watch you guys fight. Greater than. She replied with a playful tone. I couldn't help but chuckle at her response. Sylvia was always looking for ways to spice things up, and I couldn't fault her for that. Greater than. So did you do what I asked of you? Less than. I questioned, referring to the small errand I had asked her to run earlier. Less than. Yes, but I haven't told the rest yet. Greater than. She admitted. Greater than. Okay. I will tell them that. Less than. I arrived at the entrance to the guild where I was greeted by a familiar group of adventurers. Emma, Lara, Leo, and Jackson were all there, chatting and laughing amongst themselves. It was like seeing old friends again after a long time apart. Hey guys, I said cheerfully. Rimuru, haven't seen you for a while, Emma exclaimed, enveloping me in a tight embrace. I returned her embrace warmly, happy to see her again. Lara, on the other hand, had a mischievous glint in her eye as she sauntered over to me, a smirk on her lips. "Oh, there you are, brat," she said teasingly. I couldn't help but roll my eyes at her teasing. "Oh, you're here too, you arrogant devil." I couldn't resist taunting her back. It was a playful jab between us, and one that we both enjoyed. Leo chuckled at our familiar banter before interjecting. Guys, let's not make a scene in front of the guild." We all quieted down at his words, aware of the attention we might have attracted. We weren't going to do anything, I shrugged nonchalantly, and Lara nodded in agreement. The last time you said the same thing you ended up destroying most of the training grounds, Jackson reminded me with a wry smile. I chuckled a little at the memory before switching to a more serious tone. Well, Jackson, I want your help with something. Jackson narrowed his eyes in suspicion. What will it be this time? Sylvia approached and stood next to me, looking up at him with her innocent eyes. You see, I want you to sponsor Sylvia here for a rank examination, I said. Jackson looked surprised at first, but then he smiled. Ah, is that all? Of course, I'd be happy to help. I shook my head. No, but there's more. You see, it would be strange for a 7-year-old girl to become an adventurer. Jackson frowned, unsure of where I was going with this. And what about you and your brother? We'll use an alias, and we'll hide our real identity, so it's okay, I explained. But Sylvia doesn't want to do that, so there's a plan. How about Sylvia becomes your little sister? Jackson looked absolutely dumbfounded. Huh? Wait, you're kidding, right? I couldn't help but chuckle at his expression. Unfortunately for you, he's not joking. So take good care of me, big brother, Sylvia said with a beaming smile. Jackson rubbed his temples as he tried to process everything. All right, I'll do it, he said finally. Great, I knew I could count on you. She smiled at Jackson. So from today, this is your little sister Sylvia Morgan. Now let's go. My brother and Jasmine must be waiting for me. Sylvia and I turned towards the guild. Rimuru, Jackson called out to me. You'll tell us the real reason, in the future, right? I looked over my shoulder at him and everyone was looking at me seriously, of course, one day. I smiled even though they couldn't see it because of the mask. Until then, just follow me without asking. They nodded and we all headed towards the guild, the excitement in the air intensifying. Are you going to register as an adventurer today, Sylvia? Jackson asked, his eyes twinkling with amusement. Sylvia smiled, her eyes shining with determination. No, not today, she replied. I still haven't mastered my strength well. I want to work on it more before I register, so I can be stronger. Emma's eyes widened in amazement. Even though you are really strong? She exclaimed. Sylvia smiled modestly. Well, I still haven't reached someone's strength, she said, glancing over at me. And even though I'm strong, I still have a lot of potential to grow. Lara whistled approvingly. That seems a bit profound coming from a child, she said, placing both hands behind her head. Are you sure you're only 8? We both just laughed at what Lara said, but I couldn't agree more with Sylvia's mindset. Even though she was already strong, there was always room for growth and improvement. It was a lesson that I had learned early on in my own journey, and one that I still carried with me. You know, she's right, I said, nodding thoughtfully. There's always room for improvement, no matter how strong you are. I opened the double doors of the guild to reveal an interior was intricately designed, with polished gleaming white marble flooring that shimmered under the warm glow of the light fixtures, and dark oak panels that adorned the walls. The guild hall was bustling with activity, as adventurers of all shapes and sizes mingled around sleek metal tables and chairs, chatting animatedly or poring over quest details. It was clear that no expense had been spared in decorating the guild hall. As I walked further into the guild, I couldn't help but compare it to the guild in my world. While it looked similar, there were some differences. My world's guild was more advanced, mostly due to that bastard Yuki. But there was something charming about this older style that spoke to me. It felt more authentic, more real. My gaze flicked around the hall, taking in all the details. And then, I saw them, Art and Jasmine, waiting for me on one of the benches by the wall. Yo, am I late? I asked as I approached them, my eyes flicking between the two of them. Very much, Art answered, his voice changed by the mask. I shrugged. Sorry, had some errands to run. Jasmine didn't speak and just stared behind me before speaking. Is that Jackson Morgan behind you, Rimuru? Jasmine asked with a little awe. Do you know him, Jasmine? Art asked a little curiously. Jasmine nodded. Yes, he is very famous. There are even rumors that he is the strongest adventurer. Jackson gave a low chuckle as he heard their conversation. Just rumors, he said, waving a hand dismissively. I'm not that strong. The strongest, huh? Art mused, looking at Jackson. Well, rumors are just rumors, but you must be pretty skilled to have such a reputation. Jackson just chuckled. Well, I suppose I'm not bad, he said modestly. Hi Art. Sylvia spoke to Art through our mental bond. Oh Sylvia, you're here too, Art replied, his happiness evident. Are you also here to register? No, I'll just watch you today, Sylvia replied. while the rest introduces themselves. I turned to Jasmine and explained the situation to her. She nodded and led us over to a tall counter, where a young woman with a rehearsed smile was waiting for us. Welcome. How may I help the two of you? The receptionist's rehearsed smile gleamed a pearly white as she spoke. We would like to sponsor them for a rank examination, Jasmine and Jackson stated in unison as they placed a piece of paper down before the receptionist. Why yes. I understand, the receptionist answered, nodding her head fervently as she handed back the paper. Please, come over this way. The woman opened the door beside us from the other side, getting up from her seat. We will wait for you there, Laura said as they went elsewhere. We followed the clerk in silence as she led us to a small room. The receptionist knocked on the door and entered without waiting for a reply. As we all stepped inside, I laid eyes upon a slender man seated behind a pile of neatly stacked papers, jotting something down with a quilted pen. Due to the noise of his office door opening, he lifted his face towards us. I could see that he had a sharply cut, angular face with black hair and sharp eyes behind thick glasses. He seemed to stare at the receptionist, waiting for her to explain why she had barged into his office. A-Class Adventurer, Jasmine Flamesworth and S-Class Adventurer Jackson Morgan has requested this. The clerk's voice trailed off as she eyed us cautiously. Gentlemen to be taken in for a rank examination. I see. You can wait outside, Mary, the man replied without skipping a beat. As the receptionist departed, he stood up and walked towards us. It's a pleasure to meet you again, Mr. Jackson, he said as he gave us a slight bow. His voice was deep and smooth, with a hint of authority. Jackson nodded in response, his stoic expression giving away nothing of his thoughts. Likewise, Caspian, he said, his voice deep and smooth. Caspian raised his head and looked at Jasmine, who seemed to be deep in thought. Hello, Miss Jasmine, how have you been? He asked, trying to break the silence. She just gave him a silent nod as a greeting which he returned. Caspian shifted his attention to me in art, finally acknowledging our presence. My name is Caspian Bladeheart, and I am the charge of this branch. Is there a name I can address you by? His sharp eyes locked onto us as he quickly assessed our appearance. I go by Note, Arthur said beside me. It didn't take a genius to figure out that he got the name from the half note on his mask. Caspian widened his eyes at Arthur's baritone voice. But he quickly regained his composure and nodded at him. He then turned his attention towards me and looked at me expectingly. Call me Noir, I said, bringing my hand up to shake his. Caspian took my hand and gave it a firm shake. The moment we touched, I felt it. The strong presence of refined and powerfully toned wind mana. Unlike Fuse, whose strength wasn't anything impressive, I felt like Caspian was a strong person, at least by this world's standards. Caspian's eyes widened for a moment, reflecting astonishment at not being able to sense any mana from me, or even my mana core. He recovered from his surprise quickly, his face breaking into a casual smile. Then will you sponsor Noir also, Mr. Jackson? Caspian asked. Yes, but then he will go with Jasmine and Note. Jackson answered the question that was on Caspian's mind. Okay, Mr. Note and Mr. Noir, we will proceed with Miss Jasmine and Mr. Jackson being their sponsor. Do you know how that works? Caspian asked us. We shook our heads and he began to explain what would happen. An adventurer of B class or higher has the right to sponsor a new adventurer for an examination. Depending on how well you do, this exam will allow you to be placed into a suitable rank. This way, you can avoid the needless struggles of starting from the very beginning. The rank exam will consist of only a practical portion. Now, judging by the weapons they carry, I can assume they're both fighters or augmenters, correct? He said as he looked at the common swords that Art and I had on our waist rests. Yes. We replied in unison. Okay. Usually, there would be a quick application and an inspection of your mana core before the exam. Still, since Miss Jasmine and Mr. Jackson here sponsoring you, I will waive that, he continued as he opened another door at the far end of his office. Mary, take these two to the examination hall. Why yes. The receptionist, waiting outside the room, entered hastily and led us towards the back door. Please, Mr. Note, Mr. Noir, Mr. Jackson, and Miss Jasmine, right this way. Arthur Lewin Pav. Please, sit down. There are quite a number of examinees today, so if you would remain seated until the examiner calls your name, it'll really help speed up the process. The receptionist gave us one last quick bow before scurrying back down the rows of stone seats. Here. Lara waved her hand at us and we walked over to her. Jasmine and Ree stood beside me, while Sylvia, Jackson, and his entourage sat on his Rimuru right. Sylvie emerged from my brother's cloak and hopped onto my lap, seeking affection. I couldn't resist the adorable creature and obliged her, causing a smile to spread involuntarily across my face. The sound of clashing metal and thunderous shouts caught everyone's attention. From a distance, a battle was being waged between a challenger and the examiner. Ree and I took advantage of this spectacle to observe firsthand the examiner's fighting style, analyzing every move and attack with precision and focus. The challenger's movements were as erratic as a child's, unrefined and uncoordinated. With a frustrated yell, the challenger attempted another attack. "Take this," he bellowed, revealing his next move in advance. It was clear that he was either overconfident in his abilities or simply inexperienced. Either way, the examiner easily dodged his attack, not even flinching as he moved out of the way. "Idiot," I muttered under my breath, watching as the examiner effortlessly avoided every strike. It was clear that he had had enough of the challenger's ineptitude and was ready to end the battle. "Your skills as a polearm wielder are non-existent and your battle senses are lousy. And that's me being nice. You depend too much on physical strength compared to your mana reinforcement, which throws your attack's balance off. It says you've just turned 35 but you're now only at the dark orange stage. I would normally put someone of your caliber at E class, but seeing how you have a fire affinity, if that little heater move you just did can even be called fire, I'll pass you as AD class, barely." I couldn't agree more with the examiner's critique. As the two combatants left the arena, a woman with a witch's hat stepped forward to take their place. "Next. Diane Whitehall," she called out, her voice echoing throughout the testing area. "Yes. Coming." A woman on the other side of the stadium scampered down the rows of seats, nearly stumbling along the way. She was a freckled girl that looked to be well into her teens. She had her curly brown hair tied back, she was wearing the standard conjurer's robe, but it looked more like a fancy bathrobe on her small frame. The crowd snickered and giggled at her clumsy movements, causing her to shrink further in embarrassment. Snickers and giggles spread through the arena from the scarce audience, shrinking the girl, Diane, even more so in embarrassment. "What a waste of time. Just fail this girl." A boy's voice to my left caught my attention just in time for me to see him mockingly shake his head. I looked over to the source of the voice and saw a boy that looked like our age, which surprised me. I didn't expect anyone else our age to try and become an adventurer. He had medium-length blonde hair that covered his ears and was trimmed to set just above his dull, green eyes. It was easy to tell that he was an attractive boy. He was wearing a conjurer's robe that made Diane's robe look like a bathrobe in comparison. By the permanent smirk plastered onto his face and the way he lifted his chin just a tad so he was always looking down at everything, I'm sure he thought of himself as a superstar. However, what caught my eyes was the polished white, wooden staff that was by the boy's side. Embedded at the very top of the staff was a large ruby-colored gem that sparkled in the stadium lights. I couldn't help but feel a sense of disdain towards him as our eyes met. He seemed to embody everything that annoyed me about people in general. Sylvia furrowed her eyebrows as she watched the young man on stage with disdain. "He's quite the obnoxious one, isn't he, Ree?" she commented, her voice dripping with contempt. My brother nodded in agreement, ignoring the fact that Sylvia had called him by his nickname. "I think he will end up dying because of his arrogance," Sylvia continued, her eyes never leaving the boy. "He looks like the type who would abandon his comrades, too." "I agree, his attitude is quite distasteful," Ree replied, his eyes focused on the stage as Diane began her examination. I turned my attention back to the arena where the two conjurers were fighting. The girl was decent, she was able to conjure a good enough mana barrier in a fast time. She also had good control over her water element and could manipulate it to a good degree. However, it seemed like she was too confident in to set up another water barrier once her first one broke. This had cost her the match, but she still ended up getting C class, which was feat to be proud of. "She's not bad," Jasmine mumbled beside me. "Next. Elijah Knight." The conjurer examiner announced. Here. A couple rows away to my right, a boy that looked even younger than the blonde trash noble, stood up. He had short black hair that covered half his forehead, and he had a serious look behind his glasses, which made him look much more mature than his likely age. The boy wore a simple beige long sleeve and black pants and didn't have any sort of weapons on him. I half expected him to be an augmenter, but the fact that the examiner didn't switch out meant otherwise. Suddenly, a clerk who was keeping notes at the side ran up to the examiner and whispered something into her ear. The pale-faced examiner's thin eyes broadened before quickly regaining her composure. Elijah Knight, age 10. I have been just notified of your special status. As of now, you are a B-class adventurer. B-class at his age, and he didn't even need to get tested. I could see looks of disbelief on everyone's faces. Even the augmenter examiner's face was in surprise as he craned his neck to get a better view of the boy in question. Elijah Knight made a small bow and sat back down without a word. His special status, at that young age, was impressive. He must have been sponsored rather than being strong, as he was only at the dark red stage. Any adventurer should at least be a light red or dark orange. Next, Lucas Wykes. The examiner continued. HMPH. Guess it's finally my turn. The blonde-haired noble boy jumped up from his seated position and leisurely made his way down to the stage, staff in hand. The examiner looked down at her notes, but this time, her voice sounded evidently surprised. Lucas Wykes, 11 years old. Conjurer at the light orange stage. Single specialization in fire. Surprise rippled through the crowd, including myself. He was already at the light orange stage. How early did he awaken? Even Tess, who awakened at the age of 7, should be at the solid orange right now. Something seemed off about him, even though he was a half-breed. His vitality was far weaker than it should be. I've read cases of nobles overusing elixirs and beast cores as a way to create stronger mage, but none of those cases were elves. Unlike human nobles who would use a battle mage to get stronger mages, elves were loyal and didn't have many children and would treasure them. I'm guessing his family was the type of nobles to use elven slaves to create stronger mages for their house. Without even bowing, Lucas leaned lazily against his staff. Let us begin, the examiner declared, obviously a bit vexed by the boy's lack of respect. His exam started, and I hate to say this, but that plague seems to know how to use various spells in a creative way, but that was very aggressive and there was such an excessive and unnecessary mana expenditure. Even a layman would know that this would be stupid to do in moments of real danger, where stamina and amount of mana are what matter. The examiner classified him as B class, but the way he reacted showed that he didn't even care, having a confident and stupid smile on his face. As if he was just there to show off and not be a high-ranking adventurer. It was clear that his family fame and power had gone to his head. He made his way back to his seat before the examiner, who wasn't even tired, switched places with the augmenter examiner named George. The scarred man got up, stretching his body like a lazy cat. Casually high-fiving the other examiner as he walked past her, he stared at his notes. Next examinee. Note. Please come down. He bellowed without looking up. Jasmine placed a hand on my shoulder. Good luck. Good luck, uncle. Sylvie wished with a smile. I nodded and patted her head. Sylvie jumped from my lap to Sylvia's lap. Good luck. Not that you'll need it, Reese said, and Sylvia nodded. Well, I'm a bit excited to see what you can do. Don't disappoint us, Laura said with a little anticipation, and her companions nodded and wished me good luck. Giving a firm nod in response, I walked down the steps. It seems you're here to be tested under special conditions, seeing as there isn't any information here written about you. Okay. Let's see what you're made of. George regarded me with a curious stare, trying to look through my mask's eyelid to see who I was. Begin, he announced while lunging at me. The thrust was aimed directly at my head, most likely intended to scare me. Instead of dodging back or ducking, I faced the incoming tip of the sword and took a step forward, willing mana into my legs. Tilting my head just enough for the flat of the blade to graze harmlessly past my mask, I brought my sword up in one swift motion. George's sharp eyes widened by my counter as he desperately retracted in hopes to make it in time to block my swing, but the tip of my sword was already pressed against the man's throat. The examiner immediately stopped, afraid that any sudden movement in my blade might embed itself into his neck, regardless of mana reinforcement. Enough, a voice interrupted. Stand down, George. I'll be the one to test this and the next examinee. Turning my head, I saw the thin, bespectacled man named Caspian walking toward us from the corridor Jasmine and I had come in from. "Yes, sir. You will be personally examining this participant." George backed away from my blade as casually as possible, but a bead of blood rolled down his neck. "I apologize if this sounds presumptuous, but is there a need for an AA class to lower himself to test an examinee? I will be more than enough to assess this applicant," he continued, quickly wiping the blood off with his hand. Caspian's gaze lowered to George's neck, silencing the examiner. The man, regardless of what he assumed was a simple blunder on his part, was visibly baffled by the fact that the head of this branch would be the one to test me. It would be a lie to say I wasn't surprised as well. Someone classified as an AA class adventurer was at a much higher level of strength compared to an A class. As the class ranks increased, each jump was exponential, meaning that compared to D class to C class, the jump from A class to AA class was uncomparable. Being an AA class adventurer signified that you had the strength of 10 A class adventurers, and that was just a rough estimate. He should be on a whole other tier of strength compared to other humans. I was curious as to what stage his mana core was, but there was no way for me to see without him finding out. His sponsor has deep ties with me, so I feel obligated to test him personally, he chuckled as his right hand reached towards a thin rapier on his waist. Waving away George, the two of us stood at the center of the dirt arena. "Let us begin." I held my short sword just above my waist, ready to attack or defend. The array of sounds that filled the arena were soon drowned out as my focus centered solely on the man standing in front of me. The man named Caspian, the one in charge of the biggest guild halls, held the menacing rapier lightly with his right hand. He stood upright, making figure eights with the tip of his blade while letting out a little hum. Yet, he had no openings. The baleful pressure of his bloodlust was blatantly let loose as he dared to let out an innocent smile. Memories of fighting inside the dueling arena in my previous world flashed to mind as the air grew tense between us. My focus sharpened to their limits. The only sounds that came through my ears were those made by Caspian, his blade whistling in the air, the crinkled sounds of his thin clothes, and the controlled breaths he took. My body screamed to take caution against this man. I could feel my hands tremble ever so slightly, not from apprehension, but excitement. I didn't think I'd find an opponent of this caliber so soon. This battle wasn't to the death, but I knew it would differ from the spars I had with Grandpa Virion and Rimuru back in Noir. I knew from first glance that you would have to be assessed differently. "I hope you don't take this special treatment to heart," Caspian commented as he lowered his stance. In that brief moment, I analyzed every piece of useful information that I could about this man. His reach was longer than mine by about a foot, while his stance indicated that he primarily relied on thrusts rather than swings. Just from the amount of mana I could sense swirling near him, it was safe to assume that he wouldn't make any careless mistakes. "Please prepare yourself. I wouldn't want the person Miss Jasmine sponsored to lose too quickly." He sprang forward, leaving a trail of dust behind him as he closed the gap between us. In one fluid motion, he lunged his rapier like a coiled spring, using the momentum of his initial step. I twisted my head to avoid the stab, but a few strands of my hair were cut off. "Excellent dodge," he mused, retracting his rapier in preparation for his next attack. Immediately following up with an angled lunge, I held up my scabbard. A sharp thud echoed throughout the arena from the clash and I was thrown off balance. It seemed like I was still unable to use the full extent of my previous knowledge in swordsmanship with this undeveloped body. I recovered from this setback by pivoting myself, using the momentum from his attack to whirl my lacking body to generate a powerful swing. Caspian leaned back just moments before my sword reached his head, but a thin red line appeared across the tip of his nose. His thin eyes widened in surprise, but he recovered almost instantly. I took advantage of that split second, bringing my sword back to produce a sharp, upward swipe at his unguarded legs. My blade reflected the arena lights, producing a silver arc as it whizzed through the air. However, my opponent was able to reposition his sword to defend against my swing. The sharp ring of metal on metal made both Caspian and I cringe. Both of us seemed to have had the same intent as we both used the opportunity to gain distance. Only a handful of seconds passed during the deadly exchange, but each of us came out with only minor injuries. I switched my sword arm since the impact of our last blow produced a sharp vibration that made my right hand tremble. The realization that I was still unaccustomed to fighting in this body was all too apparent as I coaxed my hand. I must apologize for underestimating you. I shall be a bit more serious now. Caspian's voice was calm, but his face expressed a certain degree of seriousness that wasn't there before. His sharp eyes gleamed with a powerful killing intent that could only be present in someone who had years of fighting under his belt. His rapier was aimed toward me, but as he brought it closer toward him, the blade began glowing with a silvery hue. Ha! Letting out a sharp breath, he thrust out his rapier, piercing the air in front of him. The hairs on the back of my neck rose as my body screamed for me to run away. I instinctively pivoted myself away from where my opponent had lined his attack. A sharp pain burst from my shoulder as hot blood seeped into the sleeve of my robe. Caspian remained calm and collected, acknowledging my resilience. Seems like Miss Jasmine has picked up someone worthwhile after all, he said, a sly grin forming across his face. I sighed. I didn't want to reveal my cards, but I guess it's okay to use a little. Focusing mana into my free hand, with deft movements, I ran my fingers down the length of my sword, imbuing it with the burning flames that I had mastered. I approached him with caution. Then, I swung my sword down in a blur of fiery orange. To my surprise, Caspian was ready. He used his wind mana to create a barrier that blocked my attack. Not one to back down, I did the unexpected, using my fire mana to ignite the air around him. The sudden blaze caught him off guard, engulfing him in a powerful wall of flames. Caspian tried to use his wind mana to break free, but the flames were too fierce, locking him in their grasp momentarily. I took advantage of his distraction and charged at him, each movement fueled with determination. The flames danced and flickered around me as I swung my sword, channeling all my power into the blade. However, even as the distance between my blade and Caspian shortened, I could make out the words that the guild hall manager was chanting. Gather and unleash. Gale's vortex. I was barely able to rescind my attack and jump away as an intense swirl of airstream burst out from Caspian, surrounding him in a protective twister. The guild hall manager was hidden from view within the twister of wind and debris, allowing me some time to prepare for his next attack. The spell was released to reveal Caspian, sweating and panting, with his sword arm tucked close to his side like a snake about to lash out. His left arm was stretched out, palms open, aimed directly at me. He was chanting as the blade of his rapier began glowing even brighter in silver. Pierce those who stand against me. He roared as his rapier disappeared into a blur of countless thrusts. Skyfall torrent. Screw this, I muttered to myself as I concentrated the last of my remaining mana deep into the sensory and motor neurons in my body. Thunderclap impulse. I could hear the sharp whispers of the air bullets shooting towards me as I readied myself to dodge them. Release. Caspian screamed. The torrent of AR bullets suddenly dissipated, rendering his spell to a harmless draft of wind. I may have gotten a bit carried away with testing your limits, he apologized, sheathing his sword. Caspian began to speak his judgment. You seem like a very interesting type, and you also seem to be holding your own against me. As if you want to be put on a low rank. Unfortunately, I'm the type that loves to see adventurers push themselves to the limit, so I'll put you in the highest class one can put someone in them first rank examination. Note, A class. Quote. I'm sure you have no problem with this, yes? He asked as one of the lenses on his glasses cracked. I just nodded in agreement, making my way back to Jasmine and Ree. Next examinee. Noir. Please come down. Caspian called out, prompting Ree to stand up and jump down to the examination grounds. Good luck, Sylvia said, her voice gentle and reassuring. As Ree made his way to the center of the arena, he waved to her without looking back. You were good there. Sylvia gently stroked my back. Yes, you're stronger than the last time I saw you fight, Jasmine said. This is impressive. Congratulations for being a Class A adventurer, Leo said with a wide smile. Thanks. I didn't expect someone like him at first. I've been controlling myself not to use moves from other elements. I said as I sat next to Jasmine. I'm sorry you got to fight me after my friend over there, Ree said, his tone apologetic. It's perfectly fine. I don't mind in the least, he commented as he got into stance as well. Ri grabbed his katana's hilt and the sheath's end opened up, allowing the sword to be drawn. Its black blade rang with a metallic hum, and he took a stance, waiting for Caspian's signal to begin. Begin. And then, without wasting any time, Ri launched himself at Caspian with a horizontal strike. Caspian parried the blow with ease and countered with a quick thrust, which Ri deftly deflected. The two continued their dance of steel, their movements precise and calculated, each trying to gain the upper hand. Ri found himself pushed back by Caspian's strength and, like I had done in my fight, he imbued his sword with flames to gain an advantage. He propelled himself against Caspian, who deftly evaded his attack. He sprang forward, leaving a trail of dust behind him as he closed the gap between them. As the fight unfolded before our eyes, I couldn't help but notice something different about my brother's swordsmanship, and everyone else seemed to think the same thing. This monster, Lara smiled as she observed the fight, a glimmer of admiration in her eyes. Have you all noticed something different about him? I asked, keen to understand what was happening. Your brother is using the swordsmanship that Jackson invented, Emma pointed out, her finger tracing the curve of my brother's blade. I followed her gaze and saw that Jackson was nodding in agreement, his eyes fixed on the action. When did you teach him that, Jackson? Leo asked, his curiosity piqued. I didn't teach him that, Jackson added, surprised. Remember, he fought with you once, and he saw you when you were training Kyla, and Lloyd, Sylvia explained, her keen eyes never leaving my brother's form. He's a quick learner. But to master the art of swordsmanship so easily, Lara exclaimed, her disbelief evident in her tone. He's a prodigy, Jackson said in awe, nodding his head thoughtfully as he watched the fight. But there are still a few errors in his technique. Wait, no, it's not quite that. It looks like he's holding back, Sylvia said, and Jackson nodded. He said he didn't want a high rank, at least not from the first day, Sylvia continued, her attention still fixed firmly on the fight. He didn't want to attract unnecessary attention. But if he wants to do it, isn't what he's doing going against what he wants to do? Emma queried, her brow furrowed in confusion. Not necessarily, Sylvia shook her head. He's supposed to be Jackson's student, so it wouldn't be strange if he was that skilled. He can still maintain a low profile while showcasing his abilities. But why is he so careful? Jasmine asked as she looked at Sylvia, who shrugged her shoulder indicating that she did not know, but I did not believe it. They always looked wary, like they were trying to hide something. I'm not stupid to not guess that he had something to do with the horned being who attacked us and tried to kill Sylvia. But I knew I wouldn't get answers from them. Back to the fight, my brother was now on the offensive, his moves faster and more fluid as he tried to break through Caspian's defenses. Caspian's rushed toward Ri and swung his rapier at him, but he just blocked it with his sword. Ri's eyes glinted with determination as he seized the opportunity to strike back. His sword flashed in the sun as he delivered a series of rapid slashes that forced Caspian back. The sound of steel clashing filled the air as the two continued their fierce battle. Finally, Ri's persistence paid off. He managed to get past Caspian's guard and landed a powerful blow that sent Caspian stumbling backward. Ri didn't let up, though, and followed up with several more strikes that left Caspian reeling. Enough! Caspian cried out. He slowly stood up and dusted himself off, his eyes trained narrowly on Ri. Noir, B rank. Are you happy? He sighed. Thanks, it was nice fighting with you, my brother replied. We'll need to talk in the future, Caspian said, his voice heavy with meaning. My brother merely nodded his head in agreement, watching him walk out of sight down the dark corridor. I saw Rimuru walking towards us, so we stood up. Sylvie quickly jumped towards Ri and sat on his shoulder. Now we have to wait in the main hall and wait for your card. Jasmine started, to which Ri nodded before following her. You were good there, Lara said, ruffling my brother's hair. I agree with Lara. You really did impress us, Emma chimed in, giving him a warm smile. Leo, ever supportive, placed a comforting pat on Ri's back. Now that you're officially an adventurer, let us know if you need any help on your quests. Though I doubt you need it, he chuckled. Rimuru's face softened with gratitude. Thanks, Leo, he replied. As the group began to depart, Jackson spoke up. We're leaving now, good luck with your adventures. Right, I want to see the rest of the kids, Lara added, taking the lead. I can't wait to see how much they've improved, she finished, a hint of excitement in her voice. Be nice to them, Lara, Ri warned her, to which she simply shrugged and grinned mischievously. She flashed a mischievous grin at Rimuru. I promise to be nice to them. Maybe, she said with a wink. Ri sighed and turned his attention to Sylvie on his shoulder. Okay Sylvie, go with your ma'am. She and Seal will train you. Sylvie looked up at him with concern. Are you going to be okay there, Papa? She asked. Worry etched into her expression. Rimuru's smile widened as he patted her on the head affectionately. Of course, you don't have to worry about me, he reassured her. Sylvie nodded her head, seeming a little bit relieved. Okay, just be careful and don't get hurt, she said before jumping from Rimuru's shoulder to Sylvia's. Then see you later. Art, Sylvia said with a smile as she followed the party of adventurers who waved at us before they left. Afterwards, we made our way towards the reception area to get our adventuring cards. The same receptionist as before, Mary. Rimuru get a bronze-colored card and I got silver-colored card. From E class to B class, the card was a copper color, while starting from A class, it would change to silver, then gold for A class, then white for S class. So what should we do next? I asked. She pondered for a bit. There were several options. We could do missions that were at, or below, our ranks. These missions included a variety of tasks, from guarding to acquiring specific items. We could also transport ourselves to the beast glades and explore while hunting down mana beasts. Or dungeon exploring, Jasmine answered, a faint smile forming on her face. We started to walk towards the exit, when we heard murmurs all around us. Those kids were crazy strong. Are they even kids to begin with? They might just be genetically short. We tried to ignore the whispers and made our way to the door. As we walked, though, I couldn't help but reflect on today's battle with Caspian. It had confirmed a lot of things for me, including the fact that I had spent too much time adjusting to and learning this world's magic system. Although, it was essential to assimilate with Sylvia's beast will, hone my lightning and ice attribute techniques, and master the other elements, I had neglected my foundation, which was physical combat. In my past life, I had used the simplest techniques to utilize the most of my meager ki pool. With that and my sword, I had been able to rise to the top. Decathan offered so many more possibilities, but if I was to truly excel and become the best in this world, I was going to have to not only rely on my gifts but also on my experiences from my previous life. Mid-thought, someone bumped past me, jolting me out of my reverie. I looked up, and my eyes met those of the blonde-haired noble named Lucas. He was strutting past me, surrounded by an entourage of guards and servants. You're not bad for an augmenter, but that's all you are. Don't get cocky because you happen to be an A- class. Even in ranks, there are levels, and you would be at the bottom. Know your place, commoner. Lucas spat venomously. His voice was dripping with disdain. The blonde boy tilted his head back, attempting to look down on me even though my height outweighed his. I didn't bother arguing with him, turning instead to Jasmine. Let's go to the portal, I suggested. The last thing I wanted was to engage with someone who was clearly just trying to provoke me. Dash 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 dash. Stepping through the shimmering blue portal of the teleportation gate, my senses were immediately jolted by the scenery that lay before me. The city of Xyrus boasted the most teleportation gates of any city across the realm, as it was the only means of entering the floating city. Yet the one we had crossed had led us directly to the Beast Glade's front entrance, a vast natural expanse that was both beautiful and treacherous. The chirps of birds, the occasional roars and cries of beasts, and the constant sound of water flowing filled the background, all blending together in an enticing symphony of nature. I scanned the landscape from the tall trees to the numerous hills, all covered in various plants and shrubs. It was hard to believe that this beautiful landscape held magical beasts capable of killing even the strongest mages. My gaze lingered on the lower-rank beasts that inhabited the outskirts of the glades, all drawn there by the abundance of natural resources that surrounded them. It was a common fact that the deeper an adventurer ventured, the more mysterious and treacherous the landscape became, filled with the lairs of powerful beasts that had amassed their treasures and power within the solitudes of unexplored regions within the beast glades. I took a sip of the crisp air as Jasmine arrived behind me through the teleportation gate. Putting her hand on my shoulder, she signaled for us to start moving. There's a place I wish to visit first before going to a dungeon. We have to hurry though, it gets a little more dangerous at night. Taking heed of her words, I willed mana into my body and bolted off after her, with Ri close behind. Jasmine's wind attribute mana propelled her faster, and I took note of how easy it seemed for her to move at such a speed. The journey lasted a few hours, and the light began to fade as evening approached. We had cleared through a dense forest and reached a small clearing surrounded by trees, where a gentle stream of clear water flowed through a field of grass. We'll camp out here for tonight before jumping in the dungeon tomorrow, Jasmine announced as she set down her bag and took out a couple of items. I frowned, confused. Weren't we going to a dungeon right away? She shook her head, gathering a few branches of wood. I went into the forest, finding some sticks to make a fire. With a bit of effort, we had a fire crackling and popping in the center of our camp, casting long shadows against the trees that surrounded us. Making myself comfortable, I removed my mask and sat silently beside Ri, next to the warm flame. The softly flickering fire offered a peaceful ambiance, and we could hear the distant sounds of nature around us. The silence was almost oppressive until Jasmine spoke up. Jasmine asked Rimuru, "Rimuru, I've had this on my mind for a while, but are you and Sylvia?" I raised an eyebrow, curious as to where Jasmine was going with this line of questioning. Ri prompted, wondering the same thing I was. "Sylvia and I what?" he asked, his tone guarded. Jasmine hesitated for a moment before continuing. "Well, I've noticed that you two seem to be quite close. And, well, I was just wondering if there might be something more going on." Rimuru's eyes widened and his cheeks turned red. No, we're not what you think." I and Jasmine exchanged a mischievous look before I burst out laughing while Jasmine had a small smile, causing Rimuru's face to turn even redder. "Oh, come on, Rimuru. It's obvious that there's something going on between you two," I teased, nudging Rimuru's shoulder. Ri gave me a glare before chuckling. "What about Tess? Aren't you close?" "Tess?" Jasmine gave us a confused look. "Yeah, she's Arthur's girlfriend," Ri explained. "She's not," I protested, shaking my head. "She's just a friend, Rimuru." But to answer Jasmine's question, no, there's nothing romantic between Tess and me. Despite his words, Ri just smiled, not saying anything more. We placed more wood onto the fire, hoping it would last through the coldest parts of the night. We laid out our sleeping bags a few feet away from the fire so that we could still feel the heat's warmth. Eyes closed, I waited to drift away to sleep when I heard Jasmine mumble something. "It's weird. When I talk to either of you, it doesn't feel like I'm talking to a child." I didn't respond. Pretending to be asleep, I hoped she wouldn't push further for a reply.